Welcome everyone to today's talk, and join us actually on International Women in Engineering Day as well. And today we're actually joined by Katherine, who's a former Chief Executive of the UK Space Agency, Chair of the Global Network on Sustainability in Space, and founder of primaryspace.org, who will tell us about why she cares so much about the space and why we should all care about protecting the space environment. So welcome everyone. During the talk, you'll hear from Katherine shortly, and at the end, Katherine will try and answer as many questions as you might have all about space. So please use the Q&A chat provided and put your questions throughout the talk, and we'll get answered as many as we can. In the meantime, please do use chat to do some school shout-outs as well, as we'd like to love to know actually where you're coming from today and join us. So I'll just do one because we've only got one to start with, but please use that, and my colleague Sophie at the end will do a few more. So we are joined so far by Salwell Primary. Please use it for chat, and we'll try and get as many school shout-outs as possible, and really enjoy today's talk. And I'll hand straight over to Katherine.
Thanks, James. Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining me this afternoon to talk about my favorite subject, space junk. I mean, I say it's my favorite subject. I hate space junk, actually, but I love to talk about space junk. So let me tell you why. This is a picture of our home planet from space, and this is where I am at the moment. I am talking to you from Brighton. It's quite hard to see at that distance, isn't it, from far away in space? But here's Brighton, actually. This is a bit closer, still a picture from a satellite up in space. You can't see me still. And I have a question. Can you see any rubbish at all? I mean, it's hard to see in this picture because that's a long way away. How about now? Can you see the rubbish in Brighton? I mean, we're lucky in Brighton because actually we have lovely beach and it's usually pretty clean. But I will say every hot weekend, like we're just having now, millions of people come to Brighton and not all of them pick up their junk. A lot of people leave junk behind. So why am I talking about that? Well, we are kind of making a mess of this planet. I'm sure everybody knows who has put the junk in the oceans. There are now more than 5 trillion pieces of plastic junk in the ocean. And if I asked you who put it there, most people would answer us. We put it there, human beings. Well, we're also very busily making a mess of Earth, not just the oceans, but also the land. More than 1.3 million pieces of rubbish are dropped on UK roads every weekend. And lots of people go out and pick up the rubbish off the roads, and we need, scout troops and adopting the roads, etc., in order to keep the roads clear of all of this junk that people are leaving on the roads. It's not very eco-friendly behavior, is it? Well, I'd like you to think about what would happen if we couldn't pick up the rubbish off the roads. What would happen if there on the motorway where it was dropped? What's happening on the motorway? There's vehicles traveling at great speed, and if we just left it all there, eventually we'd have a crash. Actually, this is quite common for a piece of debris, a piece of junk to be left on the road, and for a car to have an accident or a lorry to have an accident as a result. And what would happen if we then just left that crashed car? Maybe it's had some pieces broken off of it, broken down in the middle of the motorway, but all the other traffic just kept moving at speed. What would happen is that you would have lots of collisions, creating more junk, breaking up into more pieces, and eventually that motorway would be unusable. Why am I talking about that? Well, because space is very far away, so it's quite hard to see the junk in space, but you'd be surprised to find that there is a lot of junk in space. The first time a satellite successfully orbited the Earth was in 1957. That was a satellite called Sputnik. And since then, there have been about 15,760 satellites launched, and about 10,550 are still up there. Some of them have finished their missions and have slowly deorbited and come back down and burnt up in the Earth's atmosphere, and they are not a problem. But of the 10,550 still up there, only around 7,800 work. So I'm going to let you do the maths, but the rest, there are a couple thousand up there that are basically just big pieces of junk. And big pieces of junk that are hurtling around in space at 17,600 miles an hour. And now, every week, thousands and thousands of more satellites are being built up in space. There are lots of companies launching lots of satellites for lots of reasons, and I'm going to talk about why that matters. But here's a number to keep in your head. The European Space Agency estimates there are about 130 million pieces of debris in space, but only about 35,000 of those are big enough for us to see them from the Earth so that we can kind of know where they are. And the reason that in these numbers I've said about, that's an estimate because actually we can't see all the junk in space and we don't know where everything is. We haven't been able to account for everything that's gone missing either. What else is up in space? Well, humans have done a great job of putting loads of things into space that don't really belong there. What do astronauts do when they have to wee in space? Well, that urine gets expelled out into the space environment, turns into thousands of beautiful little crystals of pee-pee. And astronauts have said that that can be quite pretty, actually. But that's all orbiting around up there until it deorbits. Astronauts have also lost tools. There was a whole bag of tools that astronauts on a spacewalk accidentally let go of. Bag of tools worth 650,000 pounds. That's up there. An astronaut has lost a glove. An astronaut has gotten distracted taking pictures of the Earth from space and lost their camera. Rubbish bags have been lost. And then an interesting experiment from 1963, the Americans thought it would be a great idea to launch 480,000 little copper needles in order to create kind of like a huge antenna around the Earth. They thought that these little copper needles could transmit radio waves and that would be good for the military, really, for protection. What they didn't really think about was that, or maybe they didn't know enough of the science at the time, that there's a lot of electromagnetic particles in space that come from the sun. And so what happens to copper needles when you mix them up with magnetic particles? They clump together. So even after all these decades, there are still about 44 clumps of copper needles that still can be seen up there that are bigger than 10 centimeters in size, all hurtling around at 17,600 miles an hour. Astronauts were told to jettison a tank of ammonia. That's not very environmentally friendly. And because things bump into each other and old things fragment, we have nuts, we have bolts, we have shards of metal, and we have flecks of paint all flying around in space. Back in the day, in the beginning, and even now today, everything that was put up in space went up on a rocket, and those rockets were not designed to come back down to Earth. They were designed to float around up there, and some of them are very old. They have exploded. They have been falling apart. Not all of them have managed to deorbit. And even today, while some companies have designed rockets that can go up and re-land on the Earth to be reusable, which is much more environmentally friendly, it's only a few companies that can do that. All the other rockets are still just leaving things up in space. Oh, and I should mention these guys. There is a surprising amount of Lego that has gone up to space. These particular Lego are in orbit around Jupiter. They went on the Juno space probe, and they were launched, I want to say, in 2011, and after 5 years, they arrived at Jupiter and have been there ever since. There are Lego on Mars. Lots of Legos gone to the International Space Station and come back. And really just literally a month or two ago, a Czechoslovakian company sent 1,000 Lego astronauts up to space and landed them safely back, just to near space. They didn't put them on Mars or the moon, but they did that in order to get people interested in space, and now they're running a competition that Czechoslovakian children can enter into in order to win a Lego astronaut that's actually been to space. So humans put a lot of things in space, and the important things that we put up there that are not junk, or at least not junk when we put them up there, are satellites. Why should we care about satellites? Well, pretty much everything we do in our everyday lives depends on satellites to work properly. Without satellites, fire engines, emergency services, police, and ambulances couldn't find where they were going so easily. Internet services wouldn't work properly. Money wouldn't work properly. We wouldn't be able to get the cash machines to work properly. Mobile phones wouldn't work properly. Broad sky television would not work properly, and our weather forecasting would be very poor. But the other really important thing that those satellites do for us, apart from communications and navigation services, is understand of our planet. About half, I should say, of the 50 climate variables. Those are the things that we measure about the climate of the Earth in order to understand climate change, in order to understand the health of our planet. About half of those things, you can only measure them from space. I like this picture because it shows the air pollution in Wuhan, China. A couple of years ago now, so you guys might not remember, but when we all went into lockdown because of COVID-19, you could see what the difference was between this pictures in 2019 of the dirty, polluted air in Wuhan, China, and then these satellite pictures from 2020, where you could see that actually without all the people moving around and the cars and the trucks and the factories working, the air was much, much healthier, much healthier. Of course, that was during lockdown. Since then, I'm sure that if we took a picture today, it would look a lot more like 2019 again. Here's also how satellites help us study climate change. This is just an example of pictures of part of the Earth that you take over time. This was a really healthy lake in Iran in 1984, and by 2014, you can see that almost none of that lake is left. It's just mineral deposits and, you know, a bunch of sort of nasty green algae. And it used to be full of wildlife. And I think if I had a 2023 satellite picture of that lake, it would probably be gone altogether now. So really important for studying climate change. What else do satellites help us do? Well, they're really important for search and rescue. Since this is just a story that was quite recent. In March, 4 people were rescued in the Pacific Ocean. Now, this is not the ship that was hit by the whale. I just found a nice picture of a whale and a ship. That was a sailboat that got hit by a whale, maybe by accident. I don't think the whale was trying to attack them, but it knocked their boat over, and they spent 10 hours in the Pacific Ocean. But they were rescued, even though they were a long way out at sea, because most ships and also people who are climbing in the mountain or who are out and about in very remote areas, they can now carry these little beacons that send signals to satellites. And if they get into difficulties, the satellites will locate them and will send their location back. And since that system was started in 1982, about 50,000 lives have been saved by satellites being able to help people. Now, we already have all these great benefits from space, but there are an awful lot of new businesses that people are developing. Satellites used to be the size of a city bus. It would fill your whole classroom, really. Now, people have invented satellites that are small enough to hold in your hand. And people are doing really interesting and innovative new things with those satellites. And they're putting up lots and lots and lots of satellites into networks that share data across each other to cover the whole world with services like internet access for schools in Africa, where they don't have the ability to lay cables, down the road to their village. And these are great services, but they are making space much, much, much more congested. There are more and more satellites every week going up into space to do these new things. Another new thing that is, people are very keen to do is to mine asteroids. So we've had a few experiments now and businesses that have started up to try and mine asteroids. Why is that? Because we have some very rare resources on the Earth that are plentiful on asteroids. Nickel, cobalt, platinum, these things that are very expensive and very hard to get out of the Earth by mining them on the Earth, they are plentiful in asteroids. Now, I'm not saying it's easy to go up there and gather those resources, and certainly quite difficult to bring them back to Earth. But it's a very interesting idea that we would be able to find large amounts of resources that are very, very scarce on this planet by being able to mine them on other bodies. Similarly, people are inventing things in order to manufacture things in space, construct things in space, and to go and service space stations and satellites with robotic spacecraft that can go and do that without having to come and go from Earth all the time or have humans on board. But there are lots of new space businesses and science missions too being developed where humans are absolutely at the heart of the idea. So there are several businesses looking at building hotels in space, looking at giving people flights into space so that they can see the Earth from space and come back down. Space tourism is becoming a real business where already we have had a number of space tourists go up and take those trips. People are designing habitats for human beings to live and work on the moon, and also with an aspiration to put people on Mars to live and work. And those businesses and science missions, one of the big ones is called Artemis. It's being led by NASA. But in the UK Space Agency is involved in that mission. It's going to put the first woman, the next man, the first person of color on the moon to live and work within just the next couple of years. The UK Space Agency's involvement in that is to create a solution of satellites around the moon that will do all of the communications between the Earth and those habitats on the moon. So there are lots of ambitions to do a lot more things in space than we already do today. Another really big and interesting one is solar power. In the UK, have a company that is designing a solution to put solar panels, solar arrays right up next to the sun, that energy directly from the sun, and beam it back down to Earth. It will probably, you're going to be grown-ups before that ever can be tested, but already the technology and the science that we need in order to be able to do that is being developed. If you can imagine the sun, solar power on Earth is a green power now. It's a very environmentally friendly way of powering the Earth, but it's not reliable. It's not great because on the Earth we have things like weather, we have clouds, we have rain, we have things that get in the way of sun. If we could have access to the sun without any of that getting in the way, in the vacuum of space, we could meet all of the Earth's energy requirements forever until the sun dies, millennia and millennia from now. So these are really great, interesting, innovative, aspirational businesses, but it's quite difficult to see how we're going to have all of those be a success with so much debris up there. And space junk does break things. You can see these pictures of International Space Station, solar panels on satellites, things that have had debris break into, run into them and cause damage. And sometimes, like this picture down in the corner, the space junk comes back to Earth. So far, luckily, none of the space junk coming back to Earth has landed anywhere where it has hurt anybody. But the more stuff we put up there, what goes up eventually must come down. So that's another thing that I personally worry about. So again, there are great companies coming up with really good ideas to try and remove the rubbish from space, and manage that problem. These are 3 companies that are all, again, in the UK, developing different technologies and going up and testing them in order to see how you can remove some of the most dangerous junk and bring it, either safely take it further away from the other satellites and spacecraft, or bring it back down to Earth. Now, what does that mean? You know, something that excites me is that it means that there are a whole bunch of really interesting jobs that people can do looking after this. You know, in order to do those, or to develop those innovative new solutions to managing human beings' junk in space, we need astronomers. We need inventors who can come up with new ways of keeping track of things in space. We need people who can understand how to analyze all that data and who can program those spacecraft and control them remotely. We need engineers, we need data scientists to do that analysis. We need people coming up with new businesses to monitor and fix the problems with how we use space today. And obviously, we need people who can design, build, and operate spacecraft. And then really importantly, we need space communicators who can get people to understand the situation in space, and we need lawyers. Lawyers are really important because right now, unlike on the motorway, we have rules, we have laws. You have to fasten your seatbelt. You have to drive a certain speed limit, don't you? Sometimes when you're little, you have to sit in a booster seat. In space, we have a few laws, but actually, we don't really have laws that control what you can leave in space and how long you can leave it there. And we don't have it. We have a lot of sort of habits that, you know, we've developed that are how to share the space in space. We don't have any laws that say this is what you can do and this is what you can't do. So we really need some rules of the road for how we use space, how we travel in space, and how we keep space safe. So I am going to just say there are questions that I have for you to think about, which is kind of, if you were an inventor, what would you invent? If it was your job to look after the space environment, what would be the most interesting thing you could do? How do you think we could help more people understand and care about why space matters, what the exciting future looks like, and why we need to take care of it? I'll leave you with those. And for your teachers, you might want to do some activities in your classrooms about that. I think that those will be sent out to you if you're interested, but they'll also be on this slide deck. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to see if you guys have any questions. And before I answer any, I'm going to just tell you, I am not a physicist, an engineer, or a scientist, or any kind of expert in anything. I am just a person who really loves space and thinks it's absolutely fascinating. So I'll try and answer your questions anyway.
Okay, thanks so much, Katherine. That was really interesting. So I'm just going to do some shout outs first of all. So first of all, hello to the elephants and flamingos at Croxby Primary. Hi to Alderton Junior School in Loughton. Year 3 at Bishop's Primary in Northumberland. We've got some Margaret's Clipper Catholic Primary in Tunbridge. Year 5 at Springvale Primary School. Year 5 St Mary's in Greater Manchester. We've got St Austin's in Wakefield. I think that's everybody, and we've got some questions coming through, which is brilliant. Okay, how much electricity does the satellite need?
I'm going to stop.
Sorry, did you catch that?
I'm going to stop presenting because I hope that will make it easier for me to hear the questions. How much?
How much electricity does the satellite need to work?
Oh, that's a very good question. It doesn't actually need very much electricity. Every satellite that goes up there will have a solar panel. You know, that was a great invention that comes from space. Our solar energy on the Earth, we use it because of the solar panels that were invented to power. They don't have big batteries. They gather the solar energy while they're facing the sun, and then they use it when they're facing away from the sun. but it's not a huge amount of energy that they need while they're up in space. What people are trying to figure out now is how could they use that solar energy to move things around? Because so far we use different fuels that you have to carry on board with you and eventually run out in order to move the spacecraft around in space. So the more crowded it gets up there, the more of that fuel gets wasted with people trying to play dodgem cars and get out of the way of other spacecraft. So now we're trying to figure out how can you use that electricity and those batteries that's plentiful and available in space to actually keep spacecraft safe as well.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So I've got a question come through from Sewell Primary Year 5. They want to know, firstly, would you ever go to space, and how long you've been interested in space for? Sorry, should I say that again? I think we lost Katherine.
Yes, I'm sorry. I might open the chat and see if I can see the question.
No problem. So that was Sewell Primary Year 5. Want to know, would you ever go to space, and how long you have been interested in space for?
Okay. Do you know what? I was born the year that the week, I should say, that the first woman ever orbited the Earth. So the first female astronaut to ever orbit the Earth, she flew the same week I was born. But I've seen all of the historic space launches and things like that, Apollo 11, but I've never really been interested in going to space because I get motion sickness even on a roller coaster, and the ride to space is a very bumpy ride still. So I don't want to go to space. But when I had the great good luck to be given a job leading the UK Space Agency, I learned so much about space that I decided that I would spend the rest of my life doing that for my job because it's absolutely fascinating.
Okay, and Miss Summers, this class is asking, can the space junk come down to Earth and cause damage?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Really big space junk could cause damage, and sometimes it does. It does come down to Earth, still looking really big. Luckily, it tends to land in the ocean or in deserts. It so far has never fallen on anybody's house or any area with lots of people living in it. So I don't know of anybody ever injured by space junk. However, the little pieces of space junk, they get burnt up in the Earth's atmosphere. And so they will not arrive all the way on Earth. The thing we don't know, and it's something that scientists don't even understand, is the more things we put up there, the more things will come down into the Earth's atmosphere. And does that start to have an impact on the Earth's atmosphere? If we're putting thousands of satellites up and thousands of satellites are coming back down all the time, that could start to cause a problem for the Earth's atmosphere, because when things burn up, they don't disappear into nothing. And there's a lot of material on those satellites that's not very good for you when you burn it. So that's an area where we need more scientists to do more science.
Definitely. Okay, so St Mary's from Duncanfield. Do you think it is possible to ever get rid of all the junk that is in space?
I don't think it is possible because we've created so much junk up there. What's good is that people are starting to recognize this as a problem, people who are building things for space. So they're working on solutions to make the way they designed things more resilient, more tougher, much with a design for sustainability in mind. So they're designing them so that they can be removed from space, so that they naturally biodegrade, if you will. There are people doing that research, and also so that they can maybe be recycled in space. So instead of taking things out of the Earth, building spacecraft, sending them up there, and then letting them turn into junk. I know a lot of scientists and innovators who are thinking about how you would reuse and recycle the junk in order to build space habitats or new spacecraft in space. That would be a much better use of it. But all these tiny flecks of paint, we're never going to clean all that up. We just have to wait for it to naturally come back down.
Okay. I've got a question from Anston Park Juniors. Do you know the names of any other satellites?
Oh my goodness. That's putting me on the spot. Yeah, I do know several names of satellites. They tend to actually be named sometimes after the companies that launch them. So I'm sure everybody will have heard of Elon Musk. I'll give you the example of Elon Musk Satellite Company. All of those are called Starlink satellites, and you can sometimes see them. I mean, Elon Musk is a very innovative businessman, but he is one of the ones putting thousands and thousands and thousands of satellites into space without thinking enough, I think, about what the consequences of so many satellites will be. He puts them up there in batches of 60 at a time. We're on his own rocket ships, which thankfully part of those rocket ships does come back down to Earth, so he's not leaving all of that up there. But sometimes if you look at the night sky and you see a line of bright lights all in a row, those are Elon Musk Starlink satellites before they move out into their positions. He launches every week, sometimes twice a week, so sometime look at the night sky where you are and see if you can see a line of his satellites.
Okay, so that's definitely something to look out for when it goes dark. I've got a question here from Year 3 and 4 at Gomersall St Mary's Primary School. Do people ever go up to space to mend the satellites?
Well, they have sent missions up to mend space stations, for sure. They mend the space station. And it used to be that they had, the Americans had a spacecraft that was a reusable space plane. It was called the Space Shuttle. They don't have that anymore. But when they had the Space Shuttle, my understanding is they did send astronauts up to fix the Hubble Space Telescope when it had a problem. And so that has happened before. But actually what people are now with robotics, robotic technology becoming so advanced, what people are now working on are these ideas where you could send a spacecraft up that's basically a robot that can do that kind of repairing without human beings need to be on board, because it's still quite challenging for human beings to go to space, and it's still, a dangerous environment for humans. So I personally think it's not necessary. We don't need astronauts for all of those things, but it is great that the astronauts go, because the more astronauts go up and do science experiments for us on the International Space Station and soon on the moon, the more we will understand space.
Okay, I've got a question from St Joseph's Primary, Year 6. How soon do you think there might be a hotel in space?
Oh, well, that's the sort of thing where if you look at what the companies say, it's always coming in just next year or 2 years from now. So there is a company building a hotel now. How soon that hotel will be ready for humans to actually go and stay in it, I don't know what their current timeline looks like. I suspect that's a little way off. It's probably 5 years or 10 years away, but I'm always surprised by what's happening in space. Maybe there'll be a news report next year or the year after where the first space tourists have stayed in that hotel. It's a good thing to Google space hotel, see what's going on in that area.
Definitely. Okay, I've had a couple of questions through about what is the biggest piece of space junk that's been found?
Found on the Earth, or that we know about up in space? Found on the Earth, the biggest pieces of space junk are definitely rocket bodies. Big rocket bodies, from decades ago when they didn't really think, they just thought space was huge. And it is huge, but they didn't think about a time in the future when we would depend on space so much and on satellites so much. So the biggest pieces of junk in space and also on Earth are rocket bodies. I don't know how to describe how big a rocket body is, but it would definitely be, at least probably 3 times the length of your classroom. And you could all stand in a circle and probably not join your hands around it. So they're big, they're very big.
Oh, wow. Okay, so Miss Sam's class would like to know, who is your favourite astronaut?
Oh, who is my favorite astronaut? Do you know, I'm gonna change that question, because I have met I've been lucky to meet Major Tim Peake. He's a great guy, and a great ambassador for space sustainability. And there are quite a few other astronauts who I actually love to watch on YouTube and stuff. But I'll tell you who my favorite person who worked in space was, who was my hero. There's a woman named Katherine Johnson. And Katherine Johnson is my hero because she was a mathematician, and she worked at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory before there was NASA. And without her, none of the Apollo missions would have happened. And she was a woman of color, and she was a single mom who had, I think, 4 kids. And if you've never watched the film Hidden Figures, go home and tell your grown-up that you would like to watch the film Hidden Figures, which is about her life. She actually only died a few years ago because she lived to be 101. But she was an amazing woman, and without her maths, we would probably be, decades and decades behind, only just now figuring out how space works, how to travel into space. Yeah.
Wow,
Katherine
I really remember.
There's a Lego figure of Katherine Johnson too.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so we have kind of run over a bit, but are you happy to keep going? Because we've still got some people online.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, so I've got a question. How much will it cost to make a machine to clear the junk?
Oh, hundreds of millions of pounds. Those are very, very complicated and expensive machines. And then you have to get it up there as well. So these companies that are inventing those things and testing them and doing demonstrations of their technology, they need billions of pounds of investment in order to do it. But they're being very successful. So it's always worth looking at the news because they're making great progress.
Okay. So Primary, what's your favorite planet?
Earth is my favorite planet. And a picture for you to Google on the internet. There's a picture that if you Google pale blue dot, is one of the things I love. NASA a long time ago sent 2 probes out to the edge of our solar system, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2. And a very famous astrophysicist named Carl Sagan, who I used to see on the sky at night when I was a little girl, he convinced them that before it left our solar system, they should turn the camera around, take a picture of Earth. And it's just this tiny blue speck in a blackness. And that's what I love about it. Earth is so special. It's so special that we need to take care of it. And we need to make sure that we start thinking about the near Earth environment in space in a way that takes care of that better than we've done with Earth over the last couple hundred years. We need to catch up on Earth, and we need to think much more. We need to be much smarter about how we don't make the same mistakes in space.
Definitely. Okay, I've got a question from some primaries, Joseph Primary. I apologise if I've asked you this one already. My memory's not very good. What made you become interested in space?
Well, I was very lucky, actually, because I was offered a job running the UK Space Agency. And to be honest, before that, it would have never occurred to me, because I thought if you had to work in space, you had to be a genius. You had to either be an astronaut or you had to be an astrophysicist. And I was neither of those things, But then what I learned is that there's a job for space in everybody. And actually, if you're interested in space, we do need lots and lots of mathematicians and scientists and, people brave enough and strong enough and fit enough to be astronauts. But we also need lots and lots of people who are just good at communicating, who are good at organizing things, who are good at thinking creatively. I mean, there are jobs out there as space artists and space photographers. So there are jobs in space for everyone. That photo of the space debris, that wasn't taken in space. It was a photo done by Max Alexander, a great friend of mine, who was a space photographer but he uses his photography on Earth in order to get people interested in topics about space. And he has an exhibition traveling around the country now and around the world, actually, called Our Fragile Space, full of wonderful pictures explaining about the space environment and why we need to care so much about it.
Well, that sounds lovely. Okay, I've got a question from Anston Park Juniors. How many space stations are there?
So at the moment, there are 2. There's a Chinese space station that has, I believe, 3 Chinese astronauts on it at the moment. And there's the International Space Station, and that, I believe, has 6 astronauts on it at the moment from the United Arab Emirates, Russia, and I'm going to say the US are the other 2. Yeah. But the European Space Agency sends astronauts to the International Space Station, and I'm very proud that the UK has gotten involved since we had Major Tim Peake go up there. We now have 3 new UK astronauts at the European Space Agency. One of them is a woman who is going to be going up pretty soon in the next mission, or the one after that. And she is actually an astrophysicist from Sussex University, where I live down here in Brighton. So I'm excited to see her go. But we also have another woman and the first ever disabled astronaut. So the UK is funding the research for that first ever para-astronaut to do their training and hopefully fly on a mission to the International Space Station to understand how to make working in space more accessible for more people, even if they have disabilities. So I'm very excited that the UK is leading on that.
Okay, so I think we've just got time for one more question. And this is from Year 5, Igfam Primary School. How old do you have to be to travel into space?
Oh, that's a very good question. So people tended to have to be, older than coming out of school. Obviously you need to go do your secondary school, and an awful lot of astronauts also go on to university. It doesn't mean you have to be the best academic in the world, but it does mean that you have to be able to learn. You have to be a good learner, because it's important in space. What astronauts actually do in space, they don't just go up there and float around, look out the window. They are doing science experiments. That's their job. So every day they get up, they exercise, and they do science experiments. And then they have a little free time to play their guitar or look out the window or take photos or whatever. So you have to have enough knowledge and be strong enough. They won't send really, really young people because your bodies are still developing. And when you get up into space to live and work, there isn't any gravity. There's very little gravity on the International Space Station, which is why you see them floating around up there. But you need gravity for your bones to develop properly. And that's why they don't want you to leave the Earth until you are at least in your 20s, and maybe even a bit later. But actually, there are astronauts who, started working in space in their 20s and 30s and, don't retire until they're probably my age. So you can have quite a long space career.
That sounds really good. Okay, so thank you ever so much, all the schools and students who put questions in the chat, and thank you very much for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed today's talk, and a big thank you to Katherine for a really, really fascinating and interesting talk today.
Thanks to all the schools. I really appreciate you coming to the talk.